Welcome to the Mìhkel podcast. I'm Mìhkel. How's your day going? Welcome to the first official episode on the channel. Hell yeah. I've gotten a lot of positive reception from a few people on the first episode, or I guess the introductory piece. And I'm really excited to start this next episode with y'all. Because now that we've officially actually started the podcast, I can get into what I really want to get into. And this is going to be a lot of fun. Trust me. The introduction podcast was only to soothe in the general idea. It was a little scuffed. And by a little scuffed, I mean extremely scuffed. Ooh. But I'm hoping that today's episode is going to be really good because we're going to be talking about my favorite thing. I'm not even kidding. Probably my favorite thing in the entire world. And we're going to be talking about a certain, how would I describe it as? I think I would say a sociolinguistic study. And my theory that I have on the basis of this study, and it's just going to be really fun. Trust me. Today's episode is going to be epic. Also to say again, I mentioned this in the first episode a couple of times, or I guess the introduction. Sorry, I had to remember to call it the introduction. I mentioned this a couple times, but I am really excited to eventually have guests on in the future. And I've had a few people already say they want to be guests, and one of them was the main person that I was thinking of when doing this. Sorry, my speech patterns are a little weird right now because I'm really excited to be recording right now. I was so excited to record that I decided to do so a day early. So yeah. I would typically record on a Wednesday, but I had just so many ideas and I couldn't waste them all, so I decided to record today because I felt like it. Who knows? But anyways, that's enough for the introductory portion of the video. I'm actually going to get into this sociolinguistic study. And this study is a form of speech that is referred to as code switching. Now, many of you listening may already know what code switching is. It's not a niche study at all. Actually, it's really common. But it is still my job on this podcast to inform. So I will put into my own words what code switching is. Code switching is changing your vocabulary, the way you speak, or any form of communication to better suit a specific person or group of people. So this can be such things as deepening your voice when talking to older folks, or using smarter words when talking to someone in power. Or what I'm going to be mainly focusing on, which is the more how would I put it? I guess common way of talking about it, which is about race. Code switching is extremely popular when you're talking to groups of people that you either don't understand or are trying to fit in with. And a lot of the times what people will do is they will change their mannerisms so that they can fit in with these people, which is essentially the root of code switching. That's why the whole thing exists in the first place, is because people are trying to fit in with other groups to seem cooler or be more respected among them. A common occurrence of this when speaking of race is changing verbiage. So, opting to use more slangful mannerisms when you're talking with a certain group of people. because typically speaking, the way you would approach a white person compared to a colored person is extremely different. And this also can apply to when you're talking to different colored people too. The issue is not of class, it's of group. So people will tend to hide different aspects of themselves based on who they are talking to, and also amplify specific traits dependent on the person as well. So say I was talking to another Mexican person, I would be using more Spanish words and talk in a less professional but more friendly, so to speak, because these are my people, so to say. Whereas if I was talking to a white person, I would be more professional but kind at the exact same time. The way I would approach them is not the same as I would approach someone else. A popular example of this would be from the Key and Peele show on Comedy Central, the episode entitled Obama's Meet and Greet. The episode itself is extremely funny, and it's a really short clip, so I recommend that everyone listening right now would watch it, because it's funny, but it's also extremely realistic with how it portrays code switching. In the skit in question, when the stand-in for Obama interacts with white people, he is more professional towards them and says, "Nice to meet you," and goes in for a handshake. Whilst when he goes towards other black people, he goes in and either daps them up or goes in for a hug, depending on who they are. And how the skit is very funny, but as well, it is extremely important here, because this shows us a direct example of how code switching really is. This is an instance where race has an effect on how you interact with someone. And again, this podcast is about humans. This is about our interactions with one another and how we do so and how it affects the world. So code switching is an extremely important topic on this show. And this doesn't only apply with race, it also applies with gender and, hell, I'd even say sexuality. Because the way someone interacts with a man and someone else is extremely different. As well, it's different when you're interacting with someone who's a part of the LGBT as opposed to a straight person. The first one I will get into is interaction based upon gender. Now, oftentimes this interaction is done in different ways depending on who they are, because gender is not a key definer here. Circling back around to the Obama skit, there's instances actually where we see how gender takes a role in our example, because the way the Obama stand-in interacts with black men compared to black women is extremely different. With the men, he'll do the aforementioned dapping up and then going in for how would I refer to this? One arm fist hug. I can't explain it in words, but if you watch the skit, you know what I'm referring to. But again, on the other side of this dichotomy, when he interacts with a black woman, he goes in for a hug in a more like grizzly style hug, one that is respectful of their role but is also friendly, because they are both experiencing what it's like to be African American in America. And gender has less of an effect on code switching compared to other factors. Not to say that it has no effect, but in comparison, the effects are quite low. Whereas with race, it's almost as if an entirely different person is talking. But now I'd like to move on to how sexuality has an effect on code switching, because this one is extremely interesting, and I have personal experience with this. when talking to a gay person, it's more likely that someone hires the pitch of their voice and also talks in a... I can't... this term is very odd to those who aren't members of the LGBT, and please bear with me. This is an actual thing. I am not trying to be weird here, but they will act in a more cunty sort of speak, which is acting, I guess, a better form of saying it would be sassy way of talking. Sassy, but specifically in a homosexual way, to which that term has been described as being cunty. And that's also really interesting here because code switching has had such a major effect on members of the LGBT that not only have they changed the way they speak, but they've also come up with terms on how they code switch. And I think that in particular is so interesting because not many other groups actually do that. I mean, there is specific things that are representative of being within that group and more stereotypical, if anything, actually. But here we have a direct example of an actual term being used for code switching. A different way of acting based on who you're talking to, and within this case being someone who is a member of the LGBT. And now I want to move it further into how on the surface level you can be the same as someone, but what represents you as a person also can make the way you code switch. Because by all means, you can be in the same group as someone, but personality is really the signifier here. That is what makes humans. So say you were to be talking of someone of all of the same groups as you, except the way this person talks is much more professional. That would trigger a reaction in which you also respond in a more professional way, because you're trying to meet the person at their level. What your brain is trying to do is connect with this person and try and match the traits that they show, which creates a lot of instances in which people kind of code switch without even meaning to do so. Also, if you're deciding to have a little fun, you can play a drinking game with how many times I say code switch in this podcast. Fair warning, there is a likely chance that you will be hospitalized soon after. But to move on, class is a huge thing in code switching. And by class, I don't just mean how much wealth you have compared to another person, like upper class, middle class, or lower class. I mean what role you play in society. Because the relationship between a teacher and a student is different than the relationship between a student and another student. Same thing goes for parent-child, child-child, and other things, you know? You get the point. So typically, when you're talking to someone who is ranked higher than you on the social ladder, you try and be more respectful when talking to them, which again is another instance of code switching. And on the inverse of this, when you're talking to someone who is of a lower class on the ladder, then you would be more authoritative and speak more pridefully. Now, of course, this isn't always the case because there is different personalities. But on average, that is how you would interact with someone in said situation. And so what really makes up code switching is not a person's role, but more so the person's life experience. It's less about the relatability within context of what groups you're in, but more relatability when talking about the experiences people have as a result of being a part of said group. So, for instance, to give two examples, women are able to relate to other women because they understand the feeling of being objectified by the world around them. But they are not able to do so with men because they do not have the same experiences as them. as well, people of color can share the feeling of being scared or having a sense of anxiety when seeing a law enforcement officer. A feeling that is unique to being a person of color. And all of these are unique to being a part of said group. All these people face oppression, but just in different ways. And for those who don't, then they interact with the person typically how they would want someone to interact with them, which typically results in someone having a more arrogant personality because they have the same struggles as the person they're talking to. So that person comes off as, well, like I said, arrogant. And all of this is because it's different life experiences. And now I'd like to talk about how code switching occurs a lot more than you'd actually think. Because it's like I previously stated, your brain wires itself to basically do it automatically depending on who you're talking to. So it becomes less of a matter of you telling yourself, okay, I'm talking to this person, I need to change this, to the point where your brain automatically hardwires to being able to match the person you're talking to based on their experiences and who they are. And so you think about it less and just jump into interaction with that person. And code switching varies when talking to different people. And on average, people interact with a ton of people during their just entire lifetime, which is resulting in people constantly switching back and forth to match the different person that they are talking to because they talk to so many different people. And when you're constantly switching back and forth on a rapid basis, this creates the theory that I would like to bring to the table, that being code switching disillusionment. Now, in my theory, code switching disillusionment appears when you talk to so many different people and code switch at such a constant rate that you become less aware of what your actual personality even is, based simply because of the factor that you constantly change and there's so many different versions of you that putting it together and really saying the one you, it's hard to say. Because after you've changed so many times, you don't know what is your real personality and what is something that you just play so that you can better fit with another person. And that issue is what leads to the disillusionment part of code switching disillusionment. Here, you don't even know what your actual personality is, and you're just left to change your personality to best fit whoever, whenever. And that issue within itself leads to bigger issues. The most common of which would be an identity crisis. A crisis where you don't know who you are anymore, and you're confused on what even a human is, let alone yourself, the human that you inhabit and spend all the time in. That's really the introduction of my theory. It's meant to be simple to understand that you can already just pick it up, you know? But here I want to actually delve deep into the framework of this. What actually creates the disillusionment? How do you solve this problem? And are you even able to solve the problem with disillusionment? Now, I'll start off with the first one, that being what creates the disillusionment to begin with. Like I said earlier, this oftentimes occurs when you put up so many personalities that you don't know and are unable to signify which one is yours. Because they're all you, except they're different versions of you, some amplified to further show relation to another person. The root of the issue is a very easy one to identify and can just simply go with one sentence. The more challenging issue here that I have proposed to you is, how do we solve the disillusionment? And I mean, even further to expand on that with honestly what I believe, how do you? Is it possible? Because, there can always be a problem, but a problem doesn't necessarily always have a solution. Now, not yet is a key word here, though. Now, personally, I actually, crazy enough, can't give you an answer to that, because I myself don't know what the solution to disillusionment would even be. I have zero clue what 100% always works to satisfy or ease what the disillusionment provides. And that's why I bring it to you guys, because I want you to think about, well, what is a solution to this problem? So right now I'm going to present to you a bunch of different ideas on what could be done to either ease or get rid of the disillusionment to begin with. Now, my first idea here is going to be the simplest one, and that is to simply stop pleasing people. Just say whatever comes out of your mouth. Now, there is a major flaw in this solution, however. Like I've said, code switching is not something you do manually, especially this late into code switching, where you already are on disillusionment. It's not done manually, it's done automatically within your head. You do it without even realizing it. So if you're able to do it without even knowing how to do it, then how do you stop it? There is no simple way to rewire your entire thought process to work against something. The human brain really only knows how to develop, not regress, which is a major flaw, especially here where learning is the problem here. Similar with PTSD, in which you know things you don't want to know and are aware of the feelings towards this. Now, am I saying disillusionment with code switching is the same as PTSD? No, I'm not. I'm simply saying that the effects and the way that it fucks with your brain is very similar and the closest relation that I can think of. And actually, with using PTSD as an example here, it's similar in the fact that PTSD actually doesn't really have a cure for it. There's ways of easing the PTSD and trying to move on with your life after it, similar to here, but there is no one cure for it, is what I would say, but there actually is a cure for it. And this cure, crazy enough, is actually the cure to every single problem faced on the planet. I can't think of a single way that this could be detrimental in the slightest, actually. And of course, what I'm talking about here is a lobotomy. Think about it. If you play into the disillusionment, soon enough, you're so disillusioned that you're no longer disillusioned. You simply are put into a state of nothingness, actually. Now, lobotomies are not the ideal solution to issues, and quite frankly, I actually am unaware if it's even legal anymore, and at the very least is definitely medically advised against. So let's move on to solutions that don't require total rewiring. And so that brings me on to my next idea. And this is the same way a lot of people cope with PTSD. Before we move on to that, though, I want to talk about what just happened I started having a coughing fit, which resulted in me having to pause the podcast for a bit, which also resulted into me dropping my phone on my forehead. So I'm going to do this next portion while trying to cope with, well, that. So yeah. Anyways, now on to idea 2, that being to just learn to cope with the disillusionment. Similar to how many people who experience PTSD do. Now, by coping, I'm not referring to substance abuse. I'm referring to moving on with your life. But see, there's another flaw in that too, because the difference between PTSD and code-switching disillusionment is the fact that PTSD mainly refers to post. So you're referring to a past event, something you are no longer living to, making it more easy to move on from it. Whereas code-switching disillusionment refers to something that is still ongoing, so it results in it being much more difficult to move on from because you're still in it. And there really is no way to move on from code-switching. It will always be a part of you, no matter where you are or what you're doing, because that's just how life works. Human interaction is unavoidable, or at least highly advised against, considering the amount of mental effects that avoiding human interaction can lead to. But back to what I was talking about, code switching is simply a part of life. There is no moving away from it, so moving on from code switching is not really an option here. The main thing is to learn to live with it, really. Except that attitude is what leads to a lot of issues in life. So learning to live with it isn't really the most desirable quote-unquote solution here. So to move on to idea 3, I'd like to bring up the idea of possibly using something similar to a diary, where you are forced to just openly use your words and just say whatever comes to mind. I mean, I guess a similar example would be this podcast, but something like that would definitely be beneficial, where you are not really restricted by code switching and just say what you're thinking. However, like the case with most of these, there is an issue in this. That being, with code switching disillusionment, it occurs where you don't know when you're code switching or when you're not. So then that brings in the question, if I'm writing in this diary, am I actually writing what I'm saying, or am I writing down what I would want to be saying? Because no matter what, a diary isn't always a 100% show off of character, and can hide some factors or stray away from other factors that they would rather not get into. So that's great. We found another issue here. I use great ironically because this is actually not good. We don't want issues. We want a perfect plan. Except I guess there's an issue in that too, because a perfect plan does not really exist. And mainly what we're looking for is just a way to ease the pains of disillusionment. Because mental things never leave. It's not like your brain can just forget something. It will always be there to some capacity. So if that's the case, let's move on from ideas and go on to the next topic here, which is it even possible to cure disillusionment? Because provided all means, we're not really finding anything here, and optimism is quite low on trying to find a solution to this problem. So I think the best way of really trying to understand disillusionment so that we can find a solution to disillusionment is getting a story from someone who actually suffers from said code-switching disillusionment. The person in question, of course, being me, the creator of the theory in the very first place. Because as you could assume, I didn't just come up with the theory out of my ass. I came with it because it's something that I have faced and have questions on now. So let's begin with my story. Every single morning, I wake up and I get in the car and I talk with my dad. I do a form of code switching that best fits the conversations that I have with my dad. Once my dad has dropped me off from school, then I use code switching on the people who are in my homeroom class. I code switch for every single class that I am in because I'm in different groups of people when I'm in different classes. I code switch during lunch, and when I get picked up again, I code switch with my conversation with my mom. When I'm at the dinner table, I code switch to fit my mom and my dad. When I text my friends, I code switch to best suit which friend I'm talking to. During the weekend, I code switch to best fit whichever family I'm hanging out with at the time. This process repeats itself over and over to the point where I'd say I code switch about 12 different times during the school week. And that's without taking into account when I'm texting my friends or talking to someone after school. During the weekend, the stats vary depending on what's happening. This constant shift in attitude makes it so that whenever I'm talking to someone, I have to always remember what personality best fits them, and it's come to the point where now I've created this theory because I've become disillusioned with myself. I don't know what my true personality even is at this point. Now, I guess you could say my personality is whatever I think of whenever I'm alone, but even then, whenever I'm alone, I spend that time to think about how I'm going to interact with people later on and change my personality to see what will best fit the future. When interacting with people, I'm always thinking ahead. I never go into a conversation without any prior training. I always know what I'm going to say or if I'm even going to say anything, which has a consequence where it's like I'm saying now, I've become disillusioned. I don't know what I would refer to as my true personality. But anyways, that's my short summary for the thesis of why I've created the theory of code switching disillusionment. It's the fundamental workings for my theory as a whole, using personal experience to create a theory and try and understand something, because that is what all theory is. It's all just trying to understand something, and that's what I'm doing with code switching disillusionment. So now that we understand the fundamentals behind why this theory was created, I'm hoping that it makes it easier for you to be able to understand the thought process that's going through this and creating theories on how we could come up with an idea for how to solve code switching disillusionment, and if we even can. And if it's not possible, then at least we can say we tried, because that's the most wonderful part about theory, is that it's not if you get the answer, but it's more about the fact that you've tried to get the answer. Socrates was not memorable because what he said was correct or hell even made sense. Because fun fact, Socrates' theories were kind of out there compared to modern standards. Like, some of the shit he said was insane. To be frank with you, nowadays Socrates would have as much intelligence as a drunkard. But the reason he was so popular was not because of what he said. It's because of the fact that he did say. It's the fact that during that time period, he was the one person who thought and tried to create a theory for life. And that's what branched all the way down. That's how humans have advanced to create now, where you don't need a guy to write down in forum the ideals and the ideas and logics behind the world. All you need is to listen and pay attention to anything, really, to try and create an idea or thoughts to something. And with that, I hopefully made you understand why I love this topic so much. Cool shit like that is why I'm still here creating ideas and sharing it to the world, because the idea of it is so interesting. It's fun to me. I love thinking, I love learning, and I love finding stuff out. It is one of the most fun things in the world, and the more I get to share about it, the happier I am. And that's really what this is all for, is to share my happiness with everyone and hopefully make other people happy too. Because these are things that I enjoy, and typically I can't really talk about it much except for in specific situations. But this is the type of stuff that I have a lot of fun talking about. And if I talk about something I like, then hopefully I'm able to get it out there and other people can like it too. And I can create a community of people who understand and are interested in what I am saying. I think the whole point of humans being able to speak is so wonderful. Humans were made as a communicative species. We weren't put here without the need to interact with people. As a species, we always strive when we work with other people and communicate with them. It's never just a one-man show. And that's why speech in itself is so interesting, because it shows how we communicate with each other. It's like gills on a fish. It doesn't make sense to us how they can just swallow water and convert it to air for them or whatever. Similar to how other animals will look at us and be like, how can they just make grunts and understand each other based on the blah, 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 blah. That's so interesting, because no other species does this. They communicate, but via signs and general understanding with motion. The way we communicate is so above that. And it's so interesting and fun to think about that I have a great time with it. And most of all, I want you guys to have fun with it too. I want to take what I have fun with and see if other people enjoy it too, because this is the type of stuff I like. This is the things I enjoy, and hopefully when people can interact with things they enjoy too, then they can be happy. And that's really my purpose behind this, is to entertain, to feel like someone is being benefited by my work here. I've always wanted to help people, en masse. I wanted to help people, but not how firefighters and trash men do, but like in a way that's bigger than that. I don't want to help people with physical stuff. I want to help them with themselves, their thoughts. That's what I most want to help people with, is thinking. Controlling the brain that we were given as a species, and try and take that and make it something wonderful. Because when a wonderful brain exists, then we have a wonderful world around that brain. And when our world is wonderful, then everything's wonderful, because our world is our everything. Except for the sun, the moon, the atmosphere, and everything else that exists beyond our planet. But still, it's our world. Originally, I wanted to make this podcast an hour long, but after thinking about it, maybe it's better if it's shortened down to it. There's no use for padding. I just want to get my ideas out there, and once I've created the fundamentals with my ideas, instead of just trying to explain all of it, I want you guys to leave this podcast and think about it later and further expand upon it in your head. So, to everyone listening to the first official episode on the Wait, give me a second, guys. On the podcast, thank you so much for listening to it to the end. You really do not know how much it means to me for you to actually pay attention to my work and think about it, because that's why I made the podcast. I want to make other people feel excited about the stuff I'm excited about too. So, thank you. And with all that being said, if you enjoyed this, thank you for listening. If you haven't, give me your criticism. But most of all, thank you. Goodbye and good night.